Okay, so what does Roland Barthes mean? What does he have in mind? How can we situate historically this claim that he makes when he says that the image of literature to be found in ordinary culture is tyrannically centered on the author, his person, his life, his tastes, his passions? Why are the stakes so high for Barthes? Why is he thinking in terms of tyranny when he's thinking about something that probably seems to us pretty benign, which is the interpretation of literary texts? Well, you have to think about when this text comes out. It comes out in, when is it, 1967 or 1968? It comes out during a time of a lot of political and social and cultural upheaval, not only in France and in continental Europe, where Barthes is situated as a professor and as a writer, but in the United States as well. When you think about the 1960s, probably most of you think about 1960s countercultures, right? We almost think about the 60s as synonymous with a whole bunch of countercultural movements that pit themselves against authoritarianism kind of writ large. So you can think about the Vietnam War and the various oppositional groups that take shape around the protest movements against the Vietnam War on college campuses like Berkeley and NYU and Columbia. You can think about something like the women's rights movement and the sexual liberation movement of the 1960s. You can think about things like the Black Panther movement and the emergence in North America of critical race studies on campuses. Black intellectuals who are doing intellectual work and cultural work specifically in opposition to a culture of white supremacy, etc. Right? So you can think about the 1960s as a place where anti-authoritarianism was in some ways in the air. It was the very kind of air people breathed and the water that people drank, to sort of use a clumsy metaphor. So Roland Barthes is writing in that particular cultural moment. And I think because of that, we can think that there's a context for the ideas that he circulates in The Death of the Author. You can't say the word authority without saying the word author. And I would suggest to you that Roland Barthes, in undermining the authority of the author, it has in mind other forms of authority too. I think that his rejection of authorship is of a piece with his radical rejection of authority writ large. And so to that extent, I think we can think about this text as of its particular cultural moment. Now, the film that I'm having you watch for Friday, I think shows us the ways that Roland Barthes' ideas still apply in the late 20th and early 21st century, to the first, 17, 18 years of the 21st century. I think that there's still something really prescient and current about Barthes' ideas, but that's not to say that they are timeless or that they transcend their particular cultural moment. I think that in all kinds of ways, they are entrenched in their cultural moment. Okay, so where does that position Roland Barthes in relation to Wimsatt and Beardsley? Both of them are invested in undermining the figure of the author, or in toppling the figure of the author, in rejecting the notion that the ultimate meaning of a text inheres in the figure of the author, who has authority to determine the meaning of his text. Right? That is where Roland Barthes and Wimsatt and Beardsley have something in common. So where do they part company? What do they not have in common? Well, Wimsatt and Beardsley say, well, you don't pay attention to the author intention, but nor do you pay attention to anything else like social and cultural and historical context, because the text is the thing. The text is a self-contained unit. It is a perfectly kind of discrete cultural object. It is isolated from the rest of the world. The job of the new critic is to burrow inside of the text and understand it from the inside out, as it were, to understand its internal structures, its internal moments of coherence and incoherence, its ambiguities, syntax, language, syntax, style, really internal to the poem itself, right? Anything external to the poem, they say, is out of bounds, it's superfluous, it's illegitimate, It's not fair game. We don't use our knowledge of a poet's life to read his or her text. That is what the new critical theory posits, right? I think Roland Barthes would say this. While I agree, and here I'm using I'm ventriloquizing my imaginary Roland Barthes. He would say, while I agree that the figure of the author needs to be toppled, needs to be undermined, needs to be rejected, I don't accept that the text is an internally coherent thing. I don't believe that it is a perfectly coherent structure. I don't believe that it is a self-contained unit of meaning. In fact, I would go on and say that meaning itself is a problem. The very notion that a text has meaning or has meanings is a flawed idea. Flawed, at least if we were understanding meaning the way that he imagines we're understanding meaning, okay? So that's the two kind of main points of difference. One, the text for Roland Barthes is not self-contained. It is not internally coherent. Rather, it is radically open-ended. It is always trying to spill over the boundaries that separate it from the rest of the world. It's not contained. It's radically open-ended. And two, Roland Barthes would suggest, I think, that our colloquial or common sense understanding of meaning is a flawed one. Okay. So how do you sort of get that abstract concept in your mind? Like how does the notion of a text that is radically open-ended, that is always pushing beyond the confines or the boundaries of the poem or the novel itself, what does that look like in practice? Okay, I'm going to answer that question in the next video, so I'm going to pause it here. Okay.